Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Andrew Rupp, and tonight we're going to be talking about flatheads, helmets, torticollis, whether your child might possibly end up needing a helmet later on in life. We're going to talk about how that affects their development as well. If you're like a lot of the other parents that we've worked with around this topic, you have a lot of questions and concerns with it. You're wondering, how do we get to this point? Like, why is my child even dealing with this? You're often wondering, is this going to affect their future head growth? Is it going to affect their brain development? And even just cosmetic issues like balding spots or flattening of the head later on in life. You have a lot of concerns. Another thing, oftentimes you're told, we're going to wait and see, maybe 4 months to 6 months, we'll reevaluate and we'll get a helmet at that point. But for a lot of parents, that doesn't sit well. They wouldn't prefer to just wait and see what happens. They'd be more proactive. They want to prevent something from developing if that's at all possible. So that is what we are going to be talking about tonight on this webinar. We're going to go over how we got to this point. We're going to talk about why so many kids are dealing with flattening in the back of the head, as well as torticollis and head restriction that goes along with that. We're going to talk about why it's so related to other challenges we see with that, such as colic or reflux or nursing and latch problems, ear infections down the road. And most importantly, we're going to talk about what you can do as parents to prevent that, what you can do to avoid all those other challenges that go hand in hand, as well as, maybe avoid the helmet altogether, or at the very least, expedite the time that you're going to spend in it. So by the end of our conversation here this evening, I want to make sure that you leave with some specific warning signs, some specific indicators that you can look for to know whether or not your child has some challenges that you should look into getting addressed sooner rather than later. Because to be honest, the wait and see approach often just means we're going to lead to other challenges. So let's jump straight into it. The real issue here, that's what we need to start with. What is actually taking place? Why are we having these flat spots, these restrictions in movement? And let's think about this now. For example, say we've got a little baby and they are unable to turn their head evenly to side. Say they spend most of their time looking off to the right. What then is going to happen, since they're spending a lot of time on their back, is this turning to the right is going to lead to a lot of pressure in the back right side of their head, because that is a side that's always contacting the car seat, or it's contacting the floor, the crib, whatever it is. So the flattening in the head is, you probably notice, it's not usually straight in the back. It's not in the center. It's off to the side one way or the other. And that's because the real reason we're dealing with this flattening, more often than not, general rule of thumb, is that we have issues with rotation. We have issues with fully able to turn our head side to side. And that's where this term torticollis comes in. So let's define a few terms here to make sure that we're all on the same page. We've been using this flattening of the head definition. The official word for that you've probably thrown around or heard mentioned is plagiocephaly. All that means is flattening of the head. So we talk about plagiocephaly, we're talking about a flat spot, same thing. Torticollis. So torticollis is referring to an inability to rotate the neck evenly side to side. And so what that looks like, it's a combination of you're stuck, so you're turned in one direction, and then you're bent to the side. So it's rotation and lateral flexion in one direction, and that's a child that's either stuck here or they're stuck here. Maybe it's extremely dramatic where you notice it, and it's the first thing you see that child and you wonder what is going on. I'm going to show you a picture later on here this evening of a kid just like that. Or maybe it's more subtle. Maybe it's something that's a little less obvious. That's just the very slight tilt or rotation that you see in the pictures or the newborn photo shoot, and you think, oh, it's just a cute, the cute little baby pose. Yes, it is cute, it is adorable. But I will say, as the pediatric chiropractor through that lens, I always cringe a little bit when I see those pictures, because I know there's likely some issues and some stress and some imbalances going on. So by all means, take the cute pictures, share how adorable your newborn is, but let's make sure that they can freely move their head. So torticollis. Torticollis is when we can't rotate evenly, and those so often go hand in hand, torticollis and plagiocephaly, because you can imagine if you're stuck looking like this, and this back right side in this example was always on the ground, that's going to get flat and that's going to wear down. So when we talk about torticollis, most people think, oh, that's a tight muscle. That's a muscular issue, specifically this one on the neck here, that one that kind of juts out when you turn. It's called the SCM, or the sternocleidomastoid. We think torticollis comes from a tightening and a constricture of that. That's why, physical therapy or some of the other treatments that are recommended by a pediatrician or a pediatric PT are stretching and mobilizing those tight areas. Awesome, great. It's helpful, but it's not really getting to the root of that cause, because muscles, yes, can get tight, but muscles are kind of dumb. They don't do anything on their own. They just do what the nerves are telling to. So if there's an issue and an imbalance with muscle activity and muscle tension, it's because there's an issue with the nervous system. It's because there's a deeper cause to that. There's some sort of neurologic challenge. In this case, that is absolutely what is going on. The muscles that are controlling this SCM come out right at the base of the skull, and we're going to talk about here in just a minute how that can get injured and how that can get damaged, which is going to lead to an inability to rotate smoothly. So when we've got a flat spot, it is more often than not because of a lack of movement in the neck. There's not proper rotation side to side in the head. And let me pause real quick and make sure that I'm not saying something that you make sure that you're not hearing something I'm not saying, and that's that the work that PTs and OTs are doing is pointless, because that's the farthest from the truth. We love working with our local PTs or OTs who are helping kids get through these challenges, because what they're doing is absolutely helping. Obviously, it wouldn't exist if that weren't the case. We love even more so working together on these sort of cases, because time and time again we see the results skyrocket. It's a synergistic relationship where it's 1 + 1 = 11, and we're able to make such greater results together, because when we combine the care that we're going to talk about here tonight with their work, it really is coming at it from every angle. So when we've got this restriction, we've got this inability to turn our head properly, we're going to end up with a flat spot, and that's just inevitable, because kids are spending a lot of time on their back for sleeping, they're spending a lot of time in the car seat. The question we have now is, why can't we rotate our head? We've got this perfectly beautiful newborn. What could possibly be wrong with them? Why wouldn't they be able to turn evenly? Why would they have this torticollis, this restriction where they're stuck side by side? I'm going to be like dizzy by the end of this webinar, I think, just from contorting my head and moving all around. So if I just drop off the screen at some point, somebody please come help. But what we need to talk about, if we want to get at the root of why that is taking place, comes back to birth, comes back to the birth process. So many times during that birth process, and we're going to be brief here because this is a whole other conversation worth a lot more time. But in short, more often than not, moms and babies aren't able to call the shots, and they're not able to go through that birth process as their bodies have been designed to. There's some sort of intervention or augmentation to that natural rhythm. When that takes place, usually one intervention leads to another, and baby's not able to exit the womb on their own. They're not able to be caught when they're entering the world. Those birth team hands are doing more like a pulling or a twisting or a rotating at the top of the neck. In even more severe cases, it's not just the hands that are doing that, but it's maybe forceps or vacuum extraction. Certainly this is the case significantly during C-section. We've got some sort of injury or trauma taking place at birth that is going to leave damage and injury at this upper part of the neck. We know intrinsically that this precious newborn that we're holding has these tiny little bodies, and they've got these ginormous, cute heads, and they're not able to support their head and neck on their own yet, which is why you're passing off the baby and you're saying, hey, careful with the head, protect the head and neck. We know these things intrinsically, but unfortunately during that birth process, that gets forgotten, and we do grab and pull and twist on that head and neck. What that leads to is then the joints up here are stuck. They're misaligned and they're fixated. It's like if we took a sledgehammer and just cracked our door hinge, that door hinge isn't going to move as freely. That is what's taking place at the top part of the neck. And then that is what's going to be exacerbated by stuff like baby spending a lot of time on their back, baby spending a lot of time in the car seat, not being held, not being face down on their belly, is only going to make that worse, because now they've got this inability to turn properly, plus constant pressure in the back here. So trying to put the pieces together here, we've got these flat spots in the head developing. Why is it taking place? It's because we don't have the proper motion. We don't have the proper movement in the spine, which is leading to not symmetrical and even pressure on the head, because if we just let babies on their own, they're just going to move and play and do whatever they want to do. There's not going to be a favorite side. But since we do have those injuries, we have those traumas, it leads to a newborn who is mostly looking to one direction, which means we've got pressure more on one side, which means that side of the head is going to start to flatten out. Let me take it to an even more personal note here. We just had a baby a little over a month ago. Baby Zion is 1 month this last Saturday, and he was born at home. He was born in a beautiful water birth. My wife brought him into the world in her own arms. So it didn't have that pulling and tugging and twisting on the head and neck. He had some other stuff, like the cord happened to be wrapped around his neck a few times, and that is absolutely a significant stress and a trauma. But even this little man, even the pediatric chiropractor's son, his first month of life, he's had a favored side. I've been working on him a lot to make sure that there's proper stability, proper balance, and no restrictions here. Because if not, I knew what was going to come. I knew that if he's always looking to the right side, we're going to have that flat spot develop, and then we're going to have all these other challenges down the road. Even my wife would kind of know when he was off or when he needed adjusted, because she would say, hey, he's not latching, he's not nursing on the side, can you check him out? We'd get him adjusted, and inevitably he would calm back down and he'd be able to nurse and latch better. If you're wondering what the heck would an adjustment have to do with breastfeeding, we'll get there here in a second as well. So that is kind of the step-by-step sequence that's taking place, that's leading from, our flat head, coming from our lack of movement in the neck and the restrictions that are taking place, which more often than not is coming from the birth process or some sort of in utero constraint. Even in the most beautiful, healthy of births, like baby Zion, birth is a big event, right? It's not, if you've given birth, if you're a mom watching this, you know that is the understatement of the year. Now, the question that you have is, what does this have to do with everything else that we talked about? How is this more than just a cosmetic issue? Won't they just grow out of it? Unfortunately, no. What we see more often than not is they don't really grow out of it. They just grow into the next set of problems. And that's what we really want to avoid, because when this underlying cause and this underlying fixation and stuckness, to use a scientific term, when that takes place and when that gets locked in there, we never get on to the next phases of development. And we end up with stuff like latching problems or inability to nurse, because your head can't rotate evenly to each breast, or your jaw can't move well. We just had a baby a couple weeks ago who got, after his first or second adjustment, it had been 2 months, hadn't been able to latch, hadn't been able to nurse. We got a text later from that mom after his second adjustment saying, he's finally nursing, he's finally latched, he's doing so much better. And it's because that restriction that was at the top part of the neck and in the jaw and all these structures was preventing him from the ability to do that. So what else do we see go hand in hand with this? Not only is it nursing problems, but it's babies who are refluxy, who are spitting up a lot, who are colicky, fussy, and stressed out. They don't want to sleep very well. Down the road, maybe in 6, 12 months in, they're starting to have ear infections. And you might be wondering how that's related. I'm going to actually pull up a slide here. Let me share my screen with you all. So where's our screen? There we go. Okay, so I've got our webinar here. The big connection of what is saying, why does this injury at the top part of the neck affect stuff like rotation and nursing and colic and reflux? It comes down to this really important nerve called the vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve comes out right at the base of your skull, and it goes by the first couple vertebrae in your neck, and then it does everything you see here on the screen. It runs your immune system. It runs your digestion. It runs all the things we want our healthy newborns to be doing: sleeping, growing, eating, pooping, developing an immune system. When we have this restriction and this injury at the top of the neck, this vagus nerve is affected. It's kind of like we've cut the cord. Not literally, the vagus nerve we'd have dramatic effects if that were the case, but we've significantly affected its function. We've affected our digestive abilities. We've affected, you might see a newborn that's gassy or refluxy because the esophagus and that sphincter that's closing off to the stomach is really irritated. We might see really poor immune system leading to the ear infections and a whole host of other challenges. And so like I said, the key here is that we're not going to grow out of these problems, because when that underlying cause isn't addressed, it's just going to lead to other issues. Now, we can go down that road a whole another 45 minutes and talk about what that looks like if that kid's 3 or 5 or 8 at that point. And we do that. We're going to talk about that just 1 week from today, actually, Tuesday, March 5th at our Perfect Storm workshop. So please, if you've got an older kiddo dealing with ear infections and ADHD and sensory challenges, please join us next Tuesday at Generous to Coffee. We're going to connect the dots to even a deeper level on how this birth injury and this birth stress can affect our development and lives as a kid for years to come. But for tonight, let's focus on these underlying basic stuff that we're talking about. So this is the issue. The vagus nerve is what connects the dots between how this stress, how this rotation and flattening of your head is going to affect so many other things as well. So the question then is, well, what the heck do you do about it? Why are we talking about this? Why in the world would a chiropractor be talking about babies with flattenings in their head? Well, at Thrive Chiropractic, my focus, my specialty is taking care of kids. We've done extensive additional training to make sure that we're able to deliver the most effective care and the most gentle and specific adjustments for a little baby. Trust me, adjusting an adult is nothing like adjusting a child. It's very gentle. Often, just the other day, we had newborns who are sleeping through their adjustment because it's that gentle and that easy for them. And so that's what we do. What we do is we find that area where we've taken a hammer to the door hinge and we've got the fixation and the inability to rotate and move. And we make those gentle corrections. We restore proper alignment and motion, especially in the top part of the neck here, and then these cranial bones through some gentle releases. And what that does is now the body can move. Now we don't have a favorite side anymore. Now we can turn equally left and right. And now we are going to have much, much better odds of proper development because we don't have constant pressure on the back of the head anymore. It can start to fill out. The expansion that's normally taking place with cerebrospinal fluid, pushing out the occiput and the dura mater is able to take place. And it starts undoing each of those steps that we had talked about. The movement is restored, so there's not the pressure and so on. That also, if your newborn hates tummy time, it's likely because they have some issues at the top part of their neck or the base of the neck there. So not only are they going to be rotating better, but if they're able to enjoy tummy time more because they're less gassy because of that vagus nerve, because they're more comfortable, because they can lift their head up better, that's only going to accelerate the improvements that they're seeing in the head shape, in the filling out of the skull and the cranium as well. Two other thoughts on that. One, I've got to show you this picture here in a second, guys, but before we even get to that, how we know, I started talking about how this is not a muscle issue because muscles don't do anything on their own. They're kind of dumb. They just do what the nerves tell them to do. So what we're able to do is with our technology and our scans is we actually measure how your body's nervous system is functioning. We find out, are there any interferences in different areas in the nervous system that are going to be related to the challenges that your child is dealing with? And I can tell you time and time again, we see that that's absolutely the case. So to illustrate that, let me show you one of our adorable little patients we had the pleasure of caring for. So look at that first picture there. Wow, talk about torticollis. That is, I'm not even going to try to put my head in that position because I couldn't. That is the extreme of the extreme tension, misalignment, shift. She's not even close to being able to rotate her head evenly. How hard is it to believe then as she grows up, as she turns into a 1, 2, 3 month old, she's going to have flattening and issues in that spot of her head? Obviously, that's going to be the case, as well as so many other challenges. Do you think that baby could nurse very well or breastfeed? No, definitely not. So what happened? Well, throughout our care, handful of adjustments later, that little girl turns into the one on the other side. Head is in a much, much better position. But you will notice, see how in the first one she kind of was tilted, majorly tilted to the right? She still has a little bit of that tilt. At this point, we weren't done yet. We weren't to that finish line. We were still bringing balance back in, but you can see dramatic improvements through the adjustment, through relieving that pressure. As you can guess, the scans that we did on her found exactly what you'd expect. Major stress, major imbalance at several areas of the spine, but especially the top part of the neck. I remember first couple adjustments, the mom was telling us afterwards that, oh my gosh, she's like a whole nother baby. She's like the child that I always knew that she should be and could be internally. Because this is a baby that not only did we have significant head rotation issues, man, she was fussy, she was cranky, she didn't want to sleep, everything that you can imagine a baby like that would be. So that's the key here. Let's find out what the root of that problem is, not just the tight muscles, but what's actually causing it with the nervous system interference and the obstruction to proper nerve function, and then address that. Because if we can move properly, our head isn't going to have the pressure and it's going to develop as it's supposed to. Last slide here for you guys. I promised warning signs. I promise you, what can you look at and figure out whether or not my child needs to get checked out for this issue? Well, here's a handful of what you might want to look into. One is if they had a stressful birth or some sort of birth injury, that's a good indicator that we likely have some injury up top. Whether or not in their short time of life yet, it's showed up as any outward symptoms or signs, please, you're gonna wanna get them checked. Even if they didn't have a stressful birth, like I shared with Zion's story, they can still be a big part of their issue. So another indicator, if their head is always rotated in the same direction. Go back, I know like most parents, you've taken 1,000 pictures of your kids. When they're in the car seat, when they're laying on the ground or in the changing table, does their head naturally always go to the same side? Do you see every picture, they're tilting and looking in the same direction? That's another indicator that whether or not you're seeing this start to develop, it's probably down the road. If they hate tummy time, likely have this stress and this irritation in the nervous system. If they're spending a lot of time on their car seat or on their back, it's really inevitable that we're going to end up with this flattening as well. One thing that parents often aren't aware of is this next one. If they're holding their head up on their own too early, usually we think of, oh my gosh, my baby's an overachiever. They're going to be talking by 3 months. Look, they're holding their head up at 3 days or a week old or 2 weeks old. That is a sign to me that something's wrong. That baby should be mushy, should be relaxed, should be floppy at that point. We shouldn't be so stiff and rigid and holding our head up, even if it is kind of bobbling around, any earlier than 1 month. That's a sign that your nervous or your baby's nervous system has too much tension. They're too high strung, too high wired. Another indicator, they got a bald spot forming in the back of their head. And then, like we talked about a little bit ago, if these other challenges are present, those are signs that this vagus nerve, top part of the neck, has been affected. So colic, poor latching or nursing abilities, reflux, ear infections. A lot of time the ear infections don't develop till 6, 12, and 18 months. It's kind of the next step in this perfect storm pathway. But if those warning signs are present, it's absolutely something that you want to get addressed. So let me get back out of our share screen as we wrap up here, guys. I want to make sure that you have the tools and the opportunity to find out if this is what's going on in your child. So let me share a little bit about how our office works, because I don't want you to wait and see. I don't want you to just see if they'll grow out of it, because it's just going to turn into the next worst challenge. So let's be proactive about this. Let's get checked. Let's just find out if this is what's going on. Do these scans, do these assessments, talk a little bit more about what the first couple of days or weeks or months of life has been like, depending on where you are in that journey, and find out if we can help. So the way that process works in our office, it always begins with a complimentary consultation. That's a chance for us to sit down, learn more about what you want, what you don't want, just make sure you know what to expect, honestly, to put it bluntly, just to make sure that we are the right fit for what you're looking for. Because we do have a unique approach. We have a unique specialty and focus within chiropractic. Assuming that we're going to go on and we're going to do our scans and our analysis. We're going to evaluate everything that's going on. And then a day or two later, you're going to come back and we're going to sit down for our patient recommendation conference. And we're going to tell you 3 things, just whether or not we can help. That's the first one. And then if we can, how long is it going to take? What's it going to cost? Then we can get started and we can get helping your child and preventing all of these challenges down the road. As a guest here, please mention that you joined us on the webinar, and I'll make sure that our team gets you a $50 gift certificate off of that initial exam and process. Last thing, like I mentioned, don't let the fact of the uncertainty of what getting a baby adjusted is like prevent you from getting your child the help that they need. I've gone through this with so many parents, and we'll talk about, the pressure that we're using or the contact that we're going to be making with them it's like the pressure that you might use to check the ripeness of a tomato or the ripeness of an avocado. It's very gentle, very specific. It's not something that you need to be alarmed about, and not something that is potentially hurting or stressing your child out. So please give us a call, reach out. We'd love to help. We'd love to answer any questions. If you have more concerns, maybe you have other kids who have been down this road and now you're seeing some of those other warning signs, join us next week. That's where we're going to go more in depth at the Perfect Storm ADHD, Anxiety, and Sensory Workshop. And we're going to talk about some of the more advanced technology, the advanced scans that we can use to really get to the bottom of helping out kids later on in life. All right, guys, last thing before I let everyone hop off, let me see if there's any questions that I can jump to. Awesome. Well, I'll check back later. And if there are questions, please leave them in the comments. We'd be more than happy to address that individually. I'll personally reach out and respond. Like I said, you can also message or call if it's something private you'd love to chat about. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. And I cannot wait to meet you and your little one in the office and do whatever we can to help your family thrive. Have a great night, everybody.